Everyone at the sanctuary thought Thunder the Bison was broken beyond saving, until the blind girl walked into his cage. Dr. Anya Sharma had spent 2 years trying to reach him. Thunder, the 2,000-pound bison who'd watched poachers slaughter his entire family, was a ticking time bomb. He charged fences, crushed gates, he hated humans with every fiber of his being. And yet, no one saw what was coming next. Elara, a 10-year-old orphan blinded in childhood and silenced by grief, wandered into Thunder's enclosure. Alone, no one saw her slip past the gate. No one could stop her in time. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She hugged him. And in that moment, when a shattered bison met a broken child, the world tilted. Because Thunder didn't charge. He bowed, and what happened next changed every single person who saw it. Forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind that swept across the high plains of Montana carried with it a palpable loneliness, a mournful sound that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the land. At the heart of this vast expanse sat the Northwood Wildlife Sanctuary, a 2,000-acre refuge for animals that had nowhere else to go. For 15 years, its director, Dr. Anya Sharma, had dedicated her life to mending the broken bodies and spirits of creatures scarred by the human world. But there was one resident whose spirit she feared was irrevocably shattered. His name was Thunder, a 5-year-old American bison of immense size and power, and he was consumed by a silent, burning rage. Thunder had arrived at the sanctuary 2 years earlier, the sole survivor of a poaching incident that had claimed his entire family. Rescuers had found him standing vigil over his mother's body, his hide peppered with birdshot, his young eyes holding a trauma so deep it had curdled into a permanent simmering fury. He had grown into a magnificent 2,000-pound specimen, but his beauty was eclipsed by his aggression. He would charge the fences of his enclosure at the sight of any human, his massive head smashing against the reinforced steel with terrifying force. He tolerated no one, trusted nothing, and his deep, guttural bellows of rage were a constant, sorrowful reminder of the cruelty he had endured. Dr. Sharma had tried everything: behavioral therapy, calming supplements mixed into his feed, even introducing other bison in the hopes of rekindling his social instincts. Nothing worked. Thunder remained a solitary island of fury, a prisoner of his own traumatic memories. He was the sanctuary's greatest challenge, and Anya secretly feared its most heartbreaking failure. Miles away, in a quiet, sterile room, at the county's state-run group home, another soul was adrift in her own sea of silent grief. 10-year-old Elara had lost her world 3 months ago. A car accident had stolen her parents, and a congenital condition had stolen her sight years earlier. Now orphaned and shrouded in a world of darkness, she navigated her new reality through a heightened landscape of sound, touch, and scent. The well-meaning counselors at the home found her withdrawn and difficult to reach. She rarely spoke, preferring the company of the rustling leaves outside her window to the forced cheerfulness of the other children. Her grief was a heavy blanket, and her blindness, which had once been just a part of who she was, now felt like another wall separating her from a world that had become frightening and unpredictable. Her only solace came from a weekly supervised trip organized by a kind-hearted caregiver named Ben, who was also a part-time groundskeeper at the Northwood Sanctuary. Ben understood that Elara's connection to the world was auditory, and he believed the sounds of nature might offer a comfort that human words could not. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Ben brought Elara and 2 other children to a quiet corner of the sanctuary for a sensory walk. He described the colors of the falling leaves, the sight of deer grazing in a distant meadow, and the majestic sweep of an eagle overhead. Elara listened politely, but her attention was captured by a different sound, a sound no one else seemed to truly hear. It was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the solace of her worn sneakers, a sound filled with a pain so profound it felt achingly familiar. It was the sound of Thunder's rage, but to Elara's ears, it sounded like a cry of unbearable loneliness. While Ben was momentarily distracted by one of the other children, Elara followed the sound. Her small hands traced the rough bark of trees, her feet memorized the texture of the path, and her senses guided her with an accuracy that sight could never provide. She followed the sorrowful bellows as if they were a lifeline, a song only she could understand. The sound led her to a tall steel mesh fence at the edge of a vast enclosure. She could feel the immense presence of something powerful on the other side, could smell the musky, earthy scent of a large animal, and could hear its heavy, agitated breathing. Ben and Dr. Sharma, who had been observing the group from a distance, realized Elara was missing at the same moment. A frantic search began, their hearts pounding with a terrifying dread. They found her standing at the edge of Thunder's enclosure, a place strictly forbidden to all visitors. But the true horror dawned when they saw a small gap in the fence near a gatepost, a space just large enough for a small child to slip through. Before they could shout, before they could run, Elara did the unthinkable. She slipped through the fence and walked calmly into the enclosure of the most dangerous animal in the sanctuary. Thunder, who had been pacing aggressively, stopped dead in his tracks. He saw the small human figure approaching, but something was different. This human did not stare. This human did not show fear. This human was moving directly toward him with a strange, quiet confidence. Anya and Ben watched in frozen, silent terror. This was it. The tragedy they had worked so hard to prevent. Thunder lowered his massive horned head, a clear prelude to a charge. His muscles tensed and a low growl rumbled in his chest. And then, Elara reached him. She did not scream. She did not run. She wrapped her small arms around his enormous, shaggy leg, pressing her cheek against his coarse fur. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely carrying on the wind, a sound of pure, undiluted empathy. "I hear you. You sound sad, too." And in that moment, as the blind, orphaned girl hugged the furious bison, the world seemed to stop. Thunder's rage, the furious storm that had been brewing in his soul for 2 years, suddenly fell silent. The growl in his chest subsided. His tensed muscles relaxed. He stood utterly, completely still, and what followed left everyone speechless. Have you ever felt a pain so deep that you believed no one else could possibly understand it? Do you think it's possible for two entirely different beings to recognize the same sorrow in each other? The silence that fell over the enclosure was more profound than any sound. Dr. Anya Sharma and Ben the groundskeeper stood paralyzed, their minds struggling to process the scene before them. The 2,000-pound bison, an animal that had charged every human who dared approach his fence, was now standing as still as a mountain, allowing a 10-year-old blind girl to hug his leg. The fury that had defined Thunder's existence at the sanctuary had vanished, replaced by a state of utter, bewildered calm. Elara, oblivious to the terror she had caused, continued to hold on to the bison, her small form a stark contrast against his immense dark frame. She felt the heavy thrum of his heartbeat through his leg, felt the warmth of his body, and sensed a profound shift in his energy. The vibrating rage that had drawn her here had been replaced by a deep, resonant stillness. "You were crying," she said softly, her cheek still pressed against his fur. "My mommy and daddy are gone. It makes a loud, quiet noise inside me all the time. Is that what you have too?" Thunder's response was subtle but unmistakable. He let out a long, slow breath, a sigh so deep it seemed to carry 2 years of pent-up grief and anger with it. Then, very carefully, he lowered his massive head, the tips of his formidable horns now just inches from the ground, until his wet nose was level with Elara's hair. He sniffed her gently, his breath warm against her scalp. It was a gesture, of curiosity, of investigation, completely devoid of the aggression that had been his only form of communication. Anya felt her scientific mind rebooting, frantically trying to find a logical explanation for what she was witnessing. It wasn't magic. It had to be behavioral. Thunder's trauma was triggered by visual cues, the direct eye contact of a predator, the fearful posture of a prey animal. Elara provided neither. Her approach was non-threatening, her touch was gentle, and her blindness meant she could not make the direct eye contact that Thunder associated with the hunters who had destroyed his family. She wasn't seeing a monster, so she wasn't acting like he was one. And in her fearless, empathetic approach, she had disarmed him completely. "Ben," Anya whispered into her radio, her voice trembling slightly, "we need to get her out of there. But we cannot make any sudden moves. Get the tranquilizer rifle ready, but do not show it unless he makes a move toward her." "Anya, look," Ben's voice crackled back, filled with awe. Inside the enclosure, Elara had released her hug and was now running her small hands over Thunder's shaggy face. "Your fur is so soft here," she said, her fingers exploring the area around his eyes. "But it's wet. Have you been crying too?" Thunder closed his eyes, a sign of trust so profound in a prey animal that Anya felt her own eyes well up with tears. He was not just tolerating Elara's touch, he was inviting it. He seemed to be finding a comfort in her presence that no one had been able to offer. Anya knew this was the most critical moment of her career. She had to retrieve the child without re-traumatizing the animal. She took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the fence, keeping her body angled and her eyes averted. "Elara," she said, her voice calm and even, the same tone she used to soothe frightened animals. "That's a very special friend you've made. His name is Thunder." "He's not Thunder," Elara replied without turning around. "He's quiet. He feels quiet now." "That's because he likes you, sweetie," Anya said, her heart pounding. "But it's time to come back now. Ben has some warm apple cider for us." The mention of a familiar treat was the only thing that could have broken the spell. Elara gave Thunder's face one last gentle pat. "I have to go now," she whispered to the bison. "But I'll come back and see you. We can be quiet together." As Elara turned and walked back toward the fence, Thunder did something that cemented the miraculous nature of the event. He took a step to follow her, a low, soft rumble, not of aggression, but of longing emanating from his chest. He watched her until she had safely slipped back through the gap in the fence and was in Ben's protective arms. The moment Elara was gone, Thunder's old agitation began to return, but it was different. It was less rage and more anxiety. He paced the fence line, looking in the direction Elara had gone, his sorrowful calls returning, but now they were clearly cries of loneliness, not fury. Back in her office, Anya watched the security footage over and over again, her scientific mind grappling with the emotional reality of what she had seen. This wasn't just a case of an animal not being triggered. This was a case of two deeply wounded beings finding a moment of profound connection. That evening, Anya faced a barrage of questions from Child Services and her own board of directors. The incident was a serious safety breach, a lapse in protocol that could have ended in unspeakable tragedy. But as Anya explained what had truly happened, as she described the change in Thunder and the intuitive empathy of the blind girl, a new radical idea began to form in her mind. "I know this sounds unprecedented," she told the worried faces on her video conference call, "but I believe we have a unique therapeutic opportunity here." The girl calmed the animal in a way no expert could, and the animal gave the girl a connection she has been unable to form with any human. "I am requesting permission to facilitate supervised interactions between them." The proposal was met with stunned silence. It was risky, unorthodox, and flew in the face of every safety regulation in the book. But it was also a chance to heal two souls that everyone else had given up on. If this astonishing story of an unlikely friendship is touching your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Your support allows us to share more incredible tales of healing and hope, proving that connection can be found in the most unexpected places. Thank you for helping us spread these powerful messages. The decision to allow Elara to continue visiting Thunder was the most controversial of Dr. Sharma's career. It required waivers, psychiatric evaluations, and the development of safety protocols so stringent they resembled a military operation, but Anya was adamant. She had witnessed a miracle, and she was not going to let fear and bureaucracy stand in the way of potential healing. The first supervised visit took place a week later. A new double-gated safety vestibule had been constructed, allowing Elara to enter a small secure area adjacent to the main enclosure. Ben, her trusted caregiver, was with her, while Anya and a team of animal behaviorists observed from a fortified blind nearby. The moment Thunder saw Elara approaching, his entire demeanor changed. The restless pacing stopped. The low, aggressive growls fell silent. He walked directly to the section of the fence separating them and waited, his massive head lowered in a gesture of welcome. "Hi, Thunder," Elara said, her voice bright with an excitement Ben hadn't heard since before her parents' accident. She held out a hand through a specially designed opening in the fence. "I brought you something." She offered him a crisp, red apple. Thunder sniffed it delicately before taking it from her palm with his soft, prehensile lips, a gesture of trust that was astonishing for an animal that usually tried to smash anything offered to him. "He likes it," Elara announced with a radiant smile. "He says it tastes like sunshine." The behaviorists observing were scribbling notes furiously. Elara wasn't just interacting with the bison. She was anthropomorphizing his responses, translating them into a language of emotion she could understand. This, Anya realized, was the key. Elara's inability to see Thunder as a fearsome beast allowed her to connect with the grieving, traumatized individual within. She was communicating with his spirit, not his intimidating physical form. Over the next few months, these supervised visits became the cornerstone of Elara's and Thunder's therapy. Elara, who had been withdrawn and uncommunicative at the group home, blossomed during her time at the sanctuary. She began talking more, describing to Ben and Anya what she was sensing from Thunder. "He's remembering his mother today," she said quietly during one session. "The memory feels sharp, like broken glass in his chest." Anya cross-referenced the date with the sanctuary's records. It was the anniversary of the poaching incident. The behaviorists were stunned. There was no logical way for Elara to know that, yet her intuitive reading of the animal's emotional state was uncannily accurate. She had become his interpreter. Thunder's transformation was just as profound. His aggression toward other humans began to subside, so long as Elara was present. He learned to differentiate between the sanctuary staff and strangers, showing a guarded tolerance for Anya and Ben that he had never displayed before. The rages that had once defined him were now replaced by long periods of quiet contentment. Whenever Elara was near, she would often bring a book of poetry and read to him, her soft voice a soothing balm for his troubled spirit. He would lie down by the fence, his eyes closed, listening. Their bond became a local legend, attracting media attention that Anya tried her best to manage. She insisted that this was a therapeutic process, not a sideshow. But the story was too powerful to contain. A documentary crew was eventually granted limited access, and their footage of the blind girl calmly stroking the face of the massive bison captivated the world. It was a living testament to the idea that empathy was a language that transcended sight and species. However, their peaceful world was about to be threatened. A wealthy board member of the sanctuary's parent organization, a pragmatic businessman named Mr. Abernathy, had seen the reports and was deeply concerned about the liability. He saw not a miracle, but a lawsuit waiting to happen. "This is," "An unacceptable risk, Sharma," he declared during a tense phone call. "That animal is a ticking time bomb, and you are encouraging a deeply traumatized child to keep traumatized." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Form an attachment to it. I am making a formal recommendation to the board that the bison be euthanized and the girl be placed in a more stable therapeutic program. The threat was real. Abernathy was influential and persuasive. He saw Thunder not as a grieving soul, but as a damaged asset that needed to be liquidated. Anya knew she was in for the fight of her life, not just for the animal, but for the miraculous, healing friendship that had saved them both. Just as this new crisis loomed, Thunder suddenly fell gravely ill. He contracted a severe respiratory infection, a common ailment in bison, but one that was dangerously complicated by his underlying stress and trauma. He refused to allow Anya or the veterinary team anywhere near him, charging the fence whenever they approached with medical equipment. His condition worsened rapidly. He was dehydrated, feverish, and struggling to breathe. "We can't get close. Enough to administer the antibiotics," a frustrated veterinarian told Anya. "If we tranquilize him in his weakened state, he might not wake up. I'm sorry, Anya, but we're out of options." As Thunder lay in the far corner of his enclosure, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps, Anya knew there was only one option left. It was the riskiest gamble of her life, but it was the only chance they had. She looked at Ben, who nodded in grim understanding. He went to the group home to get Elara, to ask a 10-year-old girl to walk into an enclosure with a sick, agitated, 2,000-pound animal and save his life. Have you ever had to make a decision that went against all rules and logic, but you knew in your heart it was the only right thing to do? The drive from the group home to the sanctuary was thick with a tension that felt heavier than the gathering. Storm clouds overhead. Ben had explained the situation to Elara in simple, honest terms. "Thunder is very sick, honey. The doctors need to give him medicine, but he's scared and he won't let them get close. Dr. Sharma thinks. She hopes you might be the only one he'll listen to." Elara sat silently in the passenger seat, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't cry or show fear. Instead, a look of profound, solemn determination settled on her young face. She knew what it felt like to be scared and in pain and not want to be touched. She understood. When they arrived, the scene at Thunder's enclosure was one of quiet desperation. The veterinary team stood by, their medical kits useless. Mr. Abernathy was there, having come to oversee what he assumed would be the animal's final hours, his face a grim mask of "I told you so." Dr. Sharma met Elara at the gate, kneeling down to speak to her at eye level. "Elara," she said, her voice strained with emotion, "this is very dangerous. Thunder is not himself right now. He's in a lot of pain, and scared animals can be unpredictable. You do not have to do this. He's calling for me." Elara said simply, tilting her head. "I can hear him. It's a quiet call from deep inside. He's afraid of the sharp, cold things." She was referring to the medical instruments. Anya realized with a start that Elara could likely smell the antiseptic on the vet's equipment and was associating it with Thunder's fear. "I need to go to him," Elara said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Anya made the decision. She looked at Abernathy, whose face was a mixture of horror and disbelief. "This is my responsibility," she said firmly. "And this is his only chance." She personally unlatched the gate to the enclosure. Ben stood beside it, a tranquilizer. Rifle in his hands, his face pale. He prayed he wouldn't have to use it. Elara walked into the enclosure alone. The air was cold, and the smell of the sick animal was strong. She could hear his labored, rattling breaths. She walked slowly, her feet sure on the familiar ground, her senses reaching out into the space ahead of her. Thunder was lying down, but he struggled to his feet as she approached, his body trembling with fever and agitation. He let out a low, warning growl, a sound of pure misery. Any other person would have frozen in terror. But Elara kept walking. "I know," she said softly, her voice a gentle melody against the harsh sound of his breathing. "I know it hurts. It's okay to be scared. I'm here now." She stopped a few feet from him, not reaching out, but simply offering her presence. She began to hum, a simple tuneless melody that her mother used to hum when Elara was sick. As a little girl. It was a sound of unconditional comfort, of pure love. The change in Thunder was gradual, but undeniable. The growl subsided. The trembling in his massive limbs lessened. He took a staggering step toward her, and then another. He lowered his head not in aggression, but in supplication. He rested the full weight of his enormous head on her small shoulder. Elara staggered under the weight, but held firm, wrapping her arms around his neck as best she could. "It's all right," she whispered into his ear. "They're going to help you. The medicine will make the bad feelings go away. You have to be brave now. Can you be brave for me?" The veterinary team watched, breathless. This was their chance. Anya gave a silent nod. Two vets, moving with agonizing slowness, approached the pair. Thunder tensed at their approach, a low rumble starting in his chest again. "It's okay, Thunder," Elara said, her voice firm but gentle. "They are friends. They have the medicine. That tastes like sunshine. Let them help." She never broke contact, her hands constantly stroking his face, her voice a steady stream of reassurance. With Elara as his anchor, Thunder allowed the veterinarians to approach. He stood trembling as they administered the powerful antibiotics via a long syringe. He flinched at the prick of the needle but did not pull away. He stayed with Elara. The entire procedure took less than 2 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Once the injection was given, the vets retreated as quickly and quietly as they had come. Elara stayed with Thunder until his breathing began to ease slightly from the initial dose of medication. She helped him lie back down, covering him with a hay blanket Ben had brought to the fence. Mr. Abernathy, the pragmatic businessman, stood by the fence, his jaw slack, his face stripped of its cynical certainty. He had just witnessed a 10-year-old blind girl do what a team of experts could not. He had witnessed a bond so powerful it had literally saved a life in front of his eyes. He turned to Anya, his voice humbled. "You were right, Doctor. I was wrong. What you have here, it's not a liability. It's a miracle." The crisis had passed, but everyone present knew that something fundamental had shifted. The bond between Elara and Thunder wasn't just a curiosity or a therapeutic relationship. It was a partnership, a profound connection that had the power to overcome fear, pain, and even death itself. In the days following Thunder's life-saving treatment, a new atmosphere settled over the Northwood Wildlife Sanctuary. The story of Elara's bravery and the bison's trust spread like wildfire through the community and beyond. Mr. Abernathy, true to his word, became the sanctuary's most ardent supporter, using his considerable influence and wealth to not only secure Thunder's future, but to expand the very mission of the facility. The board, moved by the undeniable evidence of the bond, unanimously approved the creation of a new specialized program. It would be called the Elara and Thunder Initiative, a therapeutic program dedicated to pairing special needs children with rescued animals who had suffered their own traumas. The sanctuary would become a place of mutual healing, founded on the principle that Elara had so beautifully demonstrated, that empathy is the most powerful medicine of all. Elara's life was transformed. The sanctuary became her true home. Anya, with Ben's full support, became her legal guardian, and the shy, grieving girl who had been lost in a world of darkness found her purpose in a world of sound, touch, and unconditional love. She flourished, her innate gift for understanding animal emotions becoming a guiding light for the new program. She worked alongside Anya and the team of behaviorists, helping other children forge connections with animals that had been deemed unreachable. She was no longer a patient, she was a healer. Thunder made a full recovery. The rage that had once been the core of his being was gone, replaced by a gentle, quiet dignity. He remained fiercely bonded to Elara, but his newfound peace extended to others as well. He became the sanctuary's gentle ambassador, a living symbol of resilience and the transformative power of a single compassionate touch. Visitors to the sanctuary would often find Elara sitting inside Thunder's enclosure, the safety protocols now adjusted to reflect their unique, unshakable bond leaning against his massive flank as she read from a braille book. The sight was always breathtaking. The young girl, now a confident teenager, and the massive bison, her steadfast guardian, existing in a state of perfect harmony. The Elara and Thunder initiative became a world-renowned success, its methods studied and replicated by sanctuaries across the globe. It proved that the deepest healing often occurs not when we are fixed by experts, but when we are seen and accepted by a kindred spirit, regardless of their form. Years later, on a warm summer evening, an adult Elara, now training to be an animal behaviorist herself, stood with Anya on a hill overlooking the sanctuary. Below, the fields were filled with children and animals, living examples of the hope she and Thunder had created. Thunder, now old and gray, grazed peacefully nearby, forever her companion. "He didn't just save my life that day," Anya said quietly, her voice filled with emotion as she remembered the day of the fire. "He saved all of us. He taught us to look beyond what we can see." Elara smiled, turning her face toward the setting sun she could feel but not see. "He didn't need us to see him," she replied. "He just needed us to hear him." Their story had begun with a furious bison and a blind, orphaned girl. It had become a timeless lesson that true sight has nothing to do with the eyes, but everything to do with the heart. It proved that our greatest wounds can become the source of our greatest strengths, and that sometimes all it takes is one small, fearless act of love to silence the rage of the world and create a sanctuary for all. The sanctuary, in the decade that followed, became more than just a refuge. It became a testament. The Elara and Thunder initiative had blossomed into a world-renowned program, a place where the quiet language of empathy was spoken fluently between wounded children and rescued animals. Elara, now a poised and insightful young woman of 20, was the heart of that program. While pursuing her degree in animal behaviorism through a partnership with Montana State University, she spent her days on the familiar grounds of Northwood. Her blindness no longer a vulnerability, but a finely tuned instrument that allowed her to perceive the emotional undercurrents of the world in ways no one else could. She was no longer just Thunder's friend. She was his legacy in motion, her every action a tribute to the bond that had saved them both. Thunder, in his old age, had achieved a state of serene majesty. The fury of his youth had been smoothed away by years of peace and love, leaving behind a profound, quiet wisdom that seemed to radiate from him. He was the sanctuary's soul, the gentle giant who would amble over to the fence to greet a new, frightened child, his very presence a calming balm. The story of the blind girl and the furious bison had become a modern fable, a touchstone for discussions on interspecies communication, trauma recovery, and the nature of consciousness. But fame, Elara and Anya were about to learn, casts a long shadow, and within that shadow, new kinds of predators can lurk. They arrived on a sun-drenched Tuesday in a fleet of silent, electric SUVs that seemed alien against the rustic backdrop of the sanctuary. They were from the OmniGen Corporation, a global leader in agricultural biotechnology, and they were led by its CEO, Dr. Alistair Finch. Finch was a man who radiated a dangerous charisma. He was handsome, articulate, and possessed a disarming smile that couldn't quite mask the cold, calculating intelligence in his eyes. He presented himself as an ardent admirer of their work, touring the facility with a well-practiced air of fascination and respect. "What you've achieved here, Dr. Sharma, is nothing short of miraculous," Finch said, his gaze sweeping over the peaceful scene of children interacting with therapy animals. "You've proven that environment and compassionate care can reshape behavior. It's truly inspiring." Elara, standing beside Anya, felt a prickle of unease. Finch's voice was smooth and appreciative, but the air around him felt sterile, analytical. He looked at the animals not with wonder, but with the appraising eye of a collector viewing a rare specimen. The true purpose of his visit was revealed. In the sanctuary's boardroom later that afternoon, he laid out a proposal that was both dazzling and horrifying. "Thunder's temperament is a genetic anomaly," Finch explained, his charming demeanor replaced by the sharp precision of a scientist. "For a bull of his size and traumatic background to exhibit such sustained docility is, from a genetic standpoint, a 1 in a billion occurrence. My company, OmniGen, is prepared to offer this sanctuary a $10 million endowment. In exchange, we want exclusive rights to study Thunder's genetic makeup." The proposal involved more than just blood samples. It detailed a series of invasive procedures, muscle biopsies, spinal taps, and extensive neurological scanning that would require Thunder to be repeatedly tranquilized and transported to a mobile laboratory. "Our goal," Finch continued, ignoring Anya's and Elara's looks of growing horror, "is to isolate the specific gene sequence responsible for his placid nature. Imagine what we could do with that, Dr. Sharma. We could bioengineer a new generation of livestock across the globe, animals free from aggression, less prone to stress. It would be the single greatest advancement in animal welfare in human history, preventing the suffering of billions of creatures." "Absolutely not," Elara said, her voice quiet but ringing with an authority that surprised everyone in the room. "Thunder is not a resource. He is a person. His peace wasn't found in his genes. It was earned through love and trust. It is not for sale." Anya stood by her. "Dr. Finch, we appreciate the offer, but this sanctuary is built on the principle of respecting the sanctity of every individual life. What you are proposing is a violation of everything we stand for. Thunder is in his twilight years. He has earned the right to live them out in peace, not as a subject in a laboratory." Finch's smile returned, but this time it was chilling. "I anticipated this sentimental, albeit admirable, response," he said, sliding a thick legal document across the table. "Which is why my legal team has been exploring other avenues. When Thunder was rescued, he was declared a ward of the state. He was never formally signed over to your ownership, merely placed in your care. Given his unique genetic potential, which we argue constitutes a significant natural resource, OmniGen is petitioning the federal government to claim custodial rights for the purposes of scientific research in the public interest. We are going to get those samples, Dr. Sharma. The only question is whether you will be compensated for your cooperation." The threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. They were facing a new kind of poacher, one who hunted not with a rifle, but with lawyers and legislation, and who sought to steal not an animal's life, but the very code that made him who he was. The battle for Northwood Sanctuary had begun in a flash of terror and a moment of miraculous connection. This new battle would be a long, cold war, fought in courtrooms and in the court of public opinion, and it would test the very definition of life, family, and what it truly means to be human. The months that followed were a grueling siege. OmniGen, with its vast resources, launched a formidable legal and public relations assault. Dr. Finch became a fixture on news programs, eloquently arguing that the sanctuary's position was anti-science and emotionally driven. He framed his quest as a noble one, a mission to end suffering for billions of farm animals. "We have the ability to edit aggression out of the food chain," he argued on a popular morning show. Are we to let the sentimental attachment to one single animal stand in the way of that kind of progress? It's an ethical numbers game, and the numbers are overwhelmingly on our side. The public narrative was cleverly manipulated. Anya and Elara were portrayed as well-meaning but naive idealists, while Finch was the pragmatic visionary. The sanctuary, once a bastion of hope, was now painted as an obstacle to a more humane future for all animals. The stress of the conflict began to take a visible toll on the sanctuary and its oldest resident. Thunder, now 22 and nearing the end of his natural lifespan, could sense the tension. The constant presence of lawyers, the occasional buzz of a news helicopter, and the appearance of omnigen observers with long-lens cameras near his enclosure disrupted his hard-won peace. His old agitation began to surface in small, worrying ways. He would pace more, his breathing would become heavy when strangers were near, and he started to exhibit the low, rumbling growls Elara hadn't heard in years. "They're undoing a decade of healing," Elara said to Anya, her voice filled with a helpless anger. "They're trying to prove he's just a set of genes, and in the process, they're re-traumatizing him back into the monster they think he is." Elara knew their only hope was to fight science with science. Their legal defense couldn't be based on love and miracles. It needed to be based on data. She threw herself into her work with a fierce new intensity. She began translating her lifetime of intuitive understanding into quantifiable behavioral science. She spent hundreds of hours meticulously documenting every interaction, every vocalization, every subtle shift in Thunder's posture. She created a complex ethogram, a detailed catalog of his behaviors, and correlated it with his emotional state and environmental stimuli. She was building a scientific case to prove that his peace was not a static genetic trait, but a dynamic, learned state of being, contingent entirely on the trust and safety of his environment and environment. Omnigen was actively destroying. Their old friends rallied to their cause. Mr. Abernathy, the once skeptical board member, used his corporate connections to wage a counter-campaign, funding independent scientific reviews and challenging Omnigen's ethical framework. Ben, the old groundskeeper, became a quiet source of strength, his simple wisdom often cutting through the complex legal jargon. "You can't measure a soul, Elara," he told her one evening as they watched Thunder rest. "And that's what they don't get. They can map his genes, but they can't map his spirit." The legal battle culminated in a preliminary hearing. Omnigen's lawyers presented a compelling case, citing the potential economic and welfare benefits of their research. They argued that the individual rights of one animal, however beloved, could not outweigh the potential good for billions. The judge, a pragmatic woman known for her adherence to the letter of the law, was clearly swayed. She issued a ruling that felt like a devastating blow. Omnigen was granted a court order for limited, non-invasive observation. Dr. Finch and his team would be allowed on sanctuary grounds, under Anya's supervision, to gather preliminary data. The arrival of the Omnigen team felt like an invasion. They set up their equipment, biometric sensors, high-resolution cameras, parabolic microphones around Thunder's enclosure. Dr. Finch maintained his air of polite professionalism, but his presence was a constant, corrosive irritant. Thunder reacted exactly as Elara had feared. He became a shadow of his former peaceful self. The sight of the strange men and their cold metallic equipment drove him into a state of high alert. He began charging the fence again, his roars of frustration and fear echoing across the valley. Finch's team meticulously documented this regression. "As you can see, Doctor," Finch said to Anya, a note of triumph in his voice, "the animal's base-level aggression is still very much present. His supposed peace is a fragile temporary state, not a core genetic trait. This only reinforces our position that he is an unstable and unpredictable animal whose docile moments are a Scientific anomaly we must investigate. It was a cruel, self-fulfilling prophecy. They were agitating the very trauma they claimed they wanted to cure. Elara felt despair closing in. How could she prove that love was a variable in a scientific equation? How could she chart the data points of a broken heart? The sanctuary was trapped in a nightmare, their philosophy of healing being twisted into a justification for the very cruelty they fought against. The breaking point came on a cold, gray morning in November. Thunder, weakened by the chronic stress and his advanced age, collapsed in his enclosure. He had suffered a massive cardiac event. He was dying. Finch saw his opportunity. He immediately had his legal team contact the judge, petitioning for an emergency order to secure genetic samples the moment the animal expired. It was a ghoulish race against time, a battle over a body that was not yet cold. Anya and Elara rushed to Thunder's side, their hearts shattering. The veterinary team did what they could, administering pain relief and oxygen, but they all knew it was the end. Thunder was fading, his breathing shallow, his great body still. "This is it," Finch said to his team, standing just outside the enclosure. "Get the cryo kits ready. We have a 10-minute window post-mortem." Elara could not bear it. She pushed past Anya and slipped into the enclosure, needing to be with her friend in his final moments. "Elara, no!" Anya cried out, but it was too late. Elara knelt beside Thunder's massive head, tears streaming down her face. She laid her head on his, humming the same soft, tuneless melody she had hummed on the day they first met. "I'm here, Thunder," she whispered. "I'm with you. It's okay to rest now." As she spoke, a commotion erupted at the far end of the enclosure. A young doe, frightened by the unusual activity and the Omni-Gen vehicles, had leaped the fence. In a panic and become hopelessly entangled in a section of wire near the woods. The deer thrashed wildly, its eyes white with terror, its struggles only tightening the wire on its leg. The Omni-Gen team watched, detached. The vets were occupied. It was a minor, collateral tragedy, but Thunder heard it. He heard the cries of the trapped, terrified animal. And with a strength that seemed to defy the very process of dying, he did something that silenced everyone, forever. With a groan that shook the earth, the old bison pushed himself up, first onto his front legs, then unsteadily to all four. He was swaying, his life force draining away with every second, but he was standing. He ignored the humans, ignored his own pain, and focused only on the struggling deer. He took one slow, deliberate step after another, walking until he stood between the trapped animal and the perceived threat of Dr. Finch's team. He didn't charge. He didn't roar. He simply stood there, a guardian. He then turned his head slightly toward the panicked deer and let out a soft, low rumble, a sound of profound, reassuring calm. The deer, hearing the sound and sensing the bull's intent, instantly stopped thrashing. In that moment of stillness, it was able to slip, its leg free from the wire, and bolt into the safety of the woods. Thunder watched it go. His duty done. His final act on this earth had not been one of aggression or fear, but one of conscious, empathetic protection for another living being. He then turned, looked at Elara with an expression of infinite love and weariness, took 2 faltering steps toward her, and collapsed. He laid his great head in her lap, gave one last deep sigh, and was gone. The world was silent, save for Elara's heartbroken sobs. The documentary crew that had been granted access for the legal proceedings had captured it all. The footage of the dying bison using his last ounce of strength to save another creature was raw, irrefutable, and devastatingly powerful. Dr. Finch stood frozen. The cryo kit forgotten in his subordinate's hand. He was a geneticist. He understood DNA, proteins, heritable traits. But what he had just witnessed was not in any textbook. It was not a gene. It was a choice. It was character. It was a soul. And in the face of it, His science, his ambition, and his certainty were utterly, completely humbled. The silence Thunder left behind was a physical presence at the Northwood Sanctuary, a void shaped like a mountain. In the weeks following his death, the global firestorm ignited by the footage of his final heroic act had incinerated Omnigen's reputation and humbled Dr. Alistair Finch into public invisibility. The sanctuary was inundated with donations, support, and letters from around the world. But for Elara, these were distant echoes. Her world had lost its center. She moved through her days in a fog of grief, the phantom weight of Thunder's head in her lap a constant, aching memory. Her only solace was a duty she felt with every fiber of her being, to give his life a final testament, to use the cold, hard data stolen by Omnigen to write the true story of his soul. In a quiet, anonymous act of penance, Dr. Finch had arranged for every terabyte of data his team had recorded to be delivered to the sanctuary. It was a staggering amount of information: high-resolution video, thermal imaging, and most importantly, the complete neurological and biometric recordings from the sensors that had monitored Thunder in his final days. It was a ghoulish gift, the intimate details of her friend's decline and death captured in clinical detail, but Elara knew it was also a key. She, Anya, and a small trusted team of scientists who had supported them through the legal battle sealed themselves in the research lab. They began the painstaking process of sifting through the data, determined to create a definitive scientific portrait of the bison who had defied science. They analyzed his behavior, his vocalizations, his heart rate, looking for patterns that would quantify the peace he had found and the stress that had been inflicted upon him. Their initial focus was on the last hour of his life. They isolated the biometric markers from the moment he collapsed to the moment he rose to save the deer. The hypothesis was clear and tragic: the stress of his failing body, compounded by the adrenaline of his final protective act, had overwhelmed his already weakened heart. They were looking for the data points of a noble death under duress. But that is not what they found. As Elara listened to the data translated into auditory graphs, a method she had developed to allow her to hear complex data sets, she detected an anomaly. The sound pattern was all wrong. During the moments of Thunder's greatest physical agony and his most selfless act, the sonic representation of his stress hormones, like cortisol, was not spiking. It was plummeting. "That can't be right," Dr. Sharma said, looking over the visual charts that confirmed what Elara was hearing. "Check the baseline. Calibrate it again. His heart rate is failing. He's in respiratory distress, but his cortisol levels are dropping." The team worked for 2 days straight, convinced there was an error in the Omnigen equipment. But the data was clean, the sensors perfectly calibrated. The finding was real, and it was impossible. The true twist, the revelation that would change everything, came when they analyzed his neurological activity in conjunction with his biochemistry. They synced the brain scan data with the hormonal output, focusing on the precise moment Thunder pushed himself to his feet to save the deer, and there it was. In the face of death, in an act of pure altruism, Thunder's brain had not been flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. It had been saturated with something else entirely. An unprecedented, massive surge of oxytocin, the neurochemical associated with bonding, trust, and love. A flood of serotonin, the key to well-being and happiness. The activity in his brain's limbic system, the seat of emotion, was not firing in patterns of fear or aggression, but in patterns that the scientists could only compare to states of profound joy, purpose, and ecstasy. "My God," whispered a neurobiologist on the team, his eyes wide as he stared at the brain maps. "These are the neurological markers of a mother seeing her newborn for the first time. It's the brain activity of a mystic in a state of deep, transcendent meditation. It's bliss." Elara, listening to the data translated into a cascade of harmonious rising tones, understood it on a level beyond science. Thunder's final act had not been a struggle against death. It had been a joyful embrace of his own core identity. He hadn't died from the stress of saving the deer. He had died in a state of ultimate fulfillment, his brain rewarding him with a peaceful, euphoric passing, because he had chosen to protect another. The very act of altruism was his spirit's final, greatest reward. He was not a victim. He was a master of his own destiny, a being who had found a way to transform the agony of death into a moment of pure, transcendent grace. This discovery was a secret far more profound and dangerous than a docile gene. This was physiological evidence of high-order consciousness, of a soul. It was a truth that could redefine the scientific understanding of life itself. But Anya and Elara knew it was also a truth that the world might not be ready for. Publishing this could turn Thunder's legacy from a story of love into a ghoulish scientific race. To replicate this bliss state in other animals, the threat was no longer a matter of genetics, but of neuroengineering, a prospect even more terrifying. While they debated what to do, a private, encrypted email arrived for Dr. Sharma. It was from Alistair Finch. He had been fired from OmniGen, but before he was escorted from the building, he had seen the same anomalous data. It had, he wrote, broken his spirit and his worldview in a way that no public shaming ever could. He needed to see them. He had a warning. Finch arrived at the sanctuary a month later, not in a luxury SUV, but in a simple rental car. He was thinner, his charismatic polish replaced by a haunted, weary look. He had not come as an antagonist, but as a penitent. "You have to know," he began, his voice raspy as he sat across from Anya and Elara in the now famous boardroom. "OmniGen knows. My former colleagues on the board, they don't see what we see. They don't see a soul. They see a product." He explained that the board, even after his departure, was moving forward on a new top-secret project codenamed Elysium. They were abandoning the genetic angle and were now focused on developing a neuropharmaceutical, a drug that could artificially stimulate the same oxytocin-serotonin flood they had witnessed in Thunder. Their goal was to create a new generation of livestock that wouldn't just be docile, but would exist in a state of chemically induced contentment, animals that would walk calmly and even joyfully to their own slaughter. "It's the ultimate perversion of his legacy," Finch said, his voice cracking with a shame so profound it was almost a physical illness. "They want to turn his final, beautiful choice into a tool for mass-produced apathy. They're building a new lab in a country with lax regulations. They will stop at nothing to get the full data set. I came to warn you. They know you have it, and they will try to take it." The plot twist was complete. The enemy was no longer a man, but an idea, a monstrous corporate ideology that sought to hijack the very neurology of joy itself. Thunder's profound spiritual act of love was about to be twisted into the ultimate instrument of control. Elara knew then that their fight was not over. It had just entered a darker, more insidious phase. They couldn't hide the data. That would be a betrayal of Thunder's truth. But they couldn't release it without context, lest it fall into the wrong hands. She realized there was only one path forward. They had to redefine the conversation entirely. Thunder's legacy could not be a scientific paper. It had to be a revolution of the heart. The plan they formulated was audacious, a synthesis of science, ethics, and storytelling. With Finch's remaining fortune, which he had quietly signed over to a foundation managed by Mr. Abernathy, they would preempt OmniGen. They would not just publish the data. They would present it to the world in a forum so public and so profound that its meaning could not be perverted. The climax of this new war would take place not in a courtroom, but on the world stage at the International Congress on Consciousness in Geneva, a gathering of the world's leading neuroscientists, philosophers, and spiritual leaders. Elara, not a PhD, but a young woman who had conversed with a bison's soul, would be the keynote speaker. For months, she prepared. She worked with Finch to understand the intricate neuroscience, and with Anya and Ben to articulate the deep, emotional truths that the data represented. She was no longer just fighting for an animal. She was fighting for the very definition of a meaningful life. When she walked onto the stage in Geneva, the auditorium was silent. She stood before the intellectual elite of the world, a slight figure with a white cane, her presence a quiet counterpoint to the towering graphs of brain activity projected behind her. She did not begin with the data. She began with the sound. She described a lonely, grieving girl following a sound of pain across a field. She described the feeling of coarse fur, the warmth of a massive body, the heavy beat of a suffering heart. She then presented the scientific data, the charts, the graphs, the undeniable hormonal and neurological evidence. She explained the science with a clarity and passion that left the audience spellbound. But her final argument transcended the data. "What this data shows," she concluded, her voice ringing with a power that filled the vast hall, "is the physiological footprint of a soul. Omnigen would have you believe this is a state that can be bottled, a chemical reaction to be synthesized. They are wrong. This neurological bliss was not a spontaneous event. It was the culmination of a life. It was born from 2 years of rage, followed by a decade of learning to trust. It was built on thousands of hours of quiet companionship, on the memory of a mother's lullaby, on the choice to find comfort in another's touch." She pointed to the final brilliant flare of light on the brain scan, the image of Thunder's moment of passing. "That is not a product to be manufactured. That is the earned grace of a life lived with purpose. It is the peace that comes from choosing love over fear and altruism over self-preservation. Omnigen wants to create joy without the journey. But what Thunder taught me, and what this data proves, is that joy is the journey. To try and steal the destination without honoring the path is not just a perversion of science. It is a desecration of life itself." Her speech was met with a moment of stunned silence, followed by a standing ovation that lasted for 10 minutes. The footage went viral before she even left the stage. Faced with global condemnation and an ethical firestorm, Omnigen's Elysium project imploded. Their stock plummeted, and their board was forced to resign in disgrace. The revolution was successful. In the years that followed, the sanctuary at Northwood became something more. With Finch's funding and Elara's vision, it was reborn as the Thunder Institute for Interspecies Consciousness. It was a place where science and spirit were not in opposition, but in dialogue. It was a place dedicated to studying and fostering the conditions for empathy, not just in animals, but between animals and humans. Dr. Alistair Finch, no longer a CEO, became its head of research, his brilliant mind now dedicated to understanding consciousness, not commodifying it. He and Elara, once adversaries, were now partners in a shared, profound mission. One evening, years later, Elara stood on the hill by Thunder's grave. The stone was warm from the setting sun. She was not alone. Alistair Finch stood beside her, his gaze no longer analytical, but filled with a quiet reverence. Below them, a new generation of children with their own wounds and their own unique gifts, were interacting with a new generation of rescued animals. And a young bison, one of Thunder's distant relations, looked up toward the hill, his eyes holding a familiar, intelligent light. Elara smiled, feeling the wind on her face. Thunder's death had not been an ending. It had been a metamorphosis. His final heroic act, his final joyful choice, had not just saved a single deer. It had planted a seed of consciousness in the heart of the world, a seed that was now growing into a forest of hope, forever changing the way humanity saw itself, and the other incredible souls with whom we share this fragile, miraculous planet. The light of the setting sun warmed the granite of Thunder's memorial stone, and Elara could feel its heat radiating through the palm of her hand. Beside her, Alistair Finch was silent, but it was a comfortable silence, one that had been forged in the crucible of shared purpose. For years, they had worked side by side, building the Institute into a place that honored the truth Thunder had revealed. "I still look at the raw data sometimes," Finch said softly, his voice barely disturbing. The evening calm, the neurological fireworks of his final moments. "My entire career was built on the premise that what cannot be measured cannot be managed." He proved that the most important things, courage, love, a sense of duty, can be measured. We just weren't using the right instruments. Elara turned her face toward the sound of his voice, a gentle smile touching her lips. "The right instrument was never a machine, Alistair. It was a heart, mine, his, and eventually, yours. That's the real work we do here, isn't it? We're not just teaching people about animal consciousness. We're teaching them how to listen with more than just their ears." As she spoke, she heard the soft tread of hooves on the new grass. The young bison calf she had noticed earlier had made its way up the hill, its curiosity overcoming its caution. It stopped a few feet away, letting out a soft, inquisitive snort. It smelled of prairie dust and sweet milk. Elara held out her hand, a gesture she had made 1,000 times to another bison, on another day that felt like a lifetime ago. The calf, a descendant of the same wild herd from which Thunder had come, hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. It sniffed her hand, its breath warm and damp, and then gave her fingers a gentle, trusting lick. It did not have Thunder's grief nor his rage, but in its calm, curious eyes, Elara felt the same ancient spirit, the same potential for a profound connection. Finch watched, his scientific mind now fully reconciled with the miracle of the present moment. He saw not a data point, but a relationship beginning. "His legacy," Finch whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "It's more than a legacy," Elara corrected gently, as she began to hum the soft, tuneless melody that had once calmed a storm of rage. The calf's ears twitched, and it leaned into her touch, its body relaxing against her hand. "It's a language. Thunder taught me that the world tried to define him by everything he wasn't, by the family he lost, by the aggression he showed, by the genes he carried. They even tried to define him by the data of his death." She ran her hand along the calf's strong, young neck, feeling the promise of the life ahead of it. But his truth was always simpler. It was in his choice to stand up, to protect, to love. His soul wasn't in the code, it was in the choice. And that feeling, that immeasurable, undeniable feeling of connection, that is the only data that will ever truly matter. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky. The man of science and the woman who saw with her soul stood together in the peaceful twilight, beside the grave of the being who had taught them both how to truly see, while the future, soft and curious, rested gently in the palm of her hand. Calf's soft muzzle rested in Elara's palm, a tangible link between the past she cherished and the future she was building. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, carrying not a story of what was lost, but a promise of what was now possible. Alistair Finch stood beside her, a silent partner in this hard-won peace, his journey from cynic to believer a testament to the truth Thunder had embodied. Elara realized the world had always tried to define Thunder by nouns, a beast of rage, a genetic anomaly, a data set. But his life was never a noun. It was a verb. He chose to trust, to protect, to love. His final, heroic act wasn't an endpoint to be analyzed, but a lesson to be lived. The Thunder Institute wasn't just a memorial. It was a verb, an ongoing action of fostering the empathy he had so powerfully demonstrated. She smiled, feeling the warmth of the young life in her hand and the enduring presence of her old friend in her heart. He had taught a blind girl how to see the soul of the world, and in doing so, had opened the eyes of humanity. His legacy was not a memory etched in stone, but a living, breathing spirit of connection, passed on through a simple, trusting touch.